This being a 2-litre engine, the hot water trick doesn't really ever work, so I prefer to just give it a little warm up with the hot gun and then put it on. Okay, so there it goes on just like that. Now, as soon as it's on, it cools down and it's in tight, so make sure you get it in all the way and don't mess about, because otherwise you'll have to pull it off the shaft again, and that can be quite a job, as you probably know by now. Okay, now we're going to fit the spacer, right, and then we're going to fit the drive. Again, I'm going to heat this up gently, just so it slops on, and then that's it. Then I put the nose bearing on. Okay. Okay, so that's the brass distributor drive ring on, and we just left the space there for the circlip. Now we're going to let this cool down 5 minutes, and then I'm going to give you hopefully a little demonstration of how to put on the circlip easily, because if you get it wrong you end up scratching the nose of the crank and it doesn't do it any good at all. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, what I've got here is a pair of reverse opening circlip pliers, which have got rather cleverly made little serrations all over them, so that you can really pick up and hold the thing. I'll give you a one-handed demonstration. You can really pick up and hold the thing, and the important thing is you can get it onto the shaft without damaging the nose bearing, especially when you're trying to get them off once they've been there for years and years. So I'll just line that up and I'll show you how it's done. Okay? And there it goes. It really is that simple. I've got loads of other pliers and so on. I'm not advertising this particularly, but I'll put it on my site if you like. From the States, very reasonable. They'll see me out. Anyway, enough of the free advertising. Now we put on the nose bearing, and then we're going to start looking at putting on the con rods. Okay, now obviously I've pre-assembled these up just to make sure, but always make sure that each thing has got a casting number on it. These must line up. The other thing is that on type board and 2 litres and so on, the nuts here, they're 14mm, but to get them to work you're going to have to use a thin wall socket. And remember, these come in 3/8 drive normally, 3 and so on, and you're going to have to torque it down, so you're going to have an adapter. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take the first one apart. I just do it in the vise and just knock it gently apart with the mallet, oil it, make sure everything's all clean up, and then offer it on. Okay, right. Okay, so that's number 1 fitted in place, not yet tightened up. And these are the special little nuts. Flat face goes down. I just put them on and just knit them up for the moment, and just go on doing all 4. And what you do is you can check even quite early on. You make sure that everything moves nicely. It doesn't drop down or it doesn't stick, especially with a newly machined crankshaft. Okay. Right, so now you're going to torque up all the big end nuts progressively. 2 litres, 35 Newton meters. So start off at 25, go around, do the whole thing, then take it up to the correct setting, 35, check for your machine, and do it over again, and do it over all 3 times, and that's the best way to do it, and make sure everything moves correctly. Okay, so here we are with the crankshaft, with the various bearings all on the hoist, ready to drop into the case. Now, what I'm showing you here
is to how to do this job easily without struggling. If you haven't got a crane, you'll have to have a second person on a step ladder and strong. Now the trick is, you see, what we have to do is the bearings have to align on the little blibs. One there, see, one there, and one there, right? And what those are the little holes that are underneath here. Look, if I turn it round, you'll be able to see what we're talking about. Right? That's that little hole there. Right. Now the way to do this easily is that you will have pre-marked the opposite side 180 degrees away with a red felt pen marker, an indelible marker. It's stronger light for the camera. There we are. Right? So that you know that when you drop the engine down, it's going to line up with the pegs, and they must absolutely line up. There's no two ways about this. Right? I put plastic drain pipe sleeve down to avoid snagging the conrods. There we are, it's all ready to go. So now what I've got to do is just line it up and just gently drop it in and just wiggle the bearings a little bit as they're going in, just to make sure they go into a good snug fit. Okay, I think we'll go on with that now. Right, so that's the crank nearly in. It's not quite pushed down, just to show you that you could just rock these backwards and forwards just slightly, knowing that it's it's locked. You can feel that the little stud has locked into the little hole, and so on. That means that when you drop the crank in all the way and put the camshaft on, everything will turn nicely. Okay. Right, then we go on to fit in the camshaft. Make sure you've got all your camshaft bearings in. The flanged one, there's one flanged one that goes on this side here, right? And when you're putting in the camshaft, make sure that the dot on the camshaft lines up with the dot on either side. Right, can you see? Very important for your timing. If you don't get that right, it will never be right. Okay. And there's not a lot of room in a Type 4 and Porsche case, so when you're manipulating the crankshaft, be careful that you don't hit the sides of the crankcase with the bolts and so on and force it and make a mess of things. There's not a lot of room in there, okay? It's all quite nice and compact. Right, okay. Now I can start to get prepared for putting the other half of the crankcase on. I've already fitted the end plug because this engine has already been apart.
Okay, so here we are again, back with the other camera, thank goodness, so the soundtrack is better and so on. Right, okay, so where have we got to? The crank has been dropped in, see all the little red marks all line up on the thing, right, and so on, and that the little marks here and there all line up, and everything's looking pretty. Right. The case bolts. There's the plastic debris. Set the plastic debris at a sort of a reasonable height. It will drop down but not catch. Why are we going to do this? Because when we do the sealing compound, a good little tip is put some sealing compound on the washers. Look, you see where's the washer of the casing bolts. Then when it gets all bolted up, it just makes it that little bit more oil tight, you know. These shouldn't leak. What else is there? Nothing much on this side. Whoops. Camera swing. Right, okay. Here is the other side. Again, all being cleaned up. Oh, yes. When you put the sealant which you're going to put on the other side. I'm not going to swing the camera around again. Don't put too much on the button, on the little capsule, because there is the tube that runs the fuel pump, and that's where the push rod goes through. And if you've got that all full of goop, you're going to have a lot of problems. What else on this? Oh yes, this is not Mr. Porsche's best bit, is it? This is the whole problem with the whole engine in the first place. You can just see here where I had to do a welded repair because the whole thing was broken. Now, as you can see, even as it's sitting there, it doesn't even line up. It does now. So that, but when you're trying to put the engine together, if you've got it like that, that's going to cause you problems. So bear that in mind. This is the number, what I call the number one stud. This is the first one that goes into the other side of the block, and it's a little bit tricky to catch sometimes. And you've got to keep your eye on that one, and everything else should go all right. Use a good quality jointing compound. This is what I use. This is what we use all the time. And there we are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over all these surfaces, which have all been re-cleaned. And it's interesting, when you go over them when you're cleaning them, you see all the damage in the past. Like, for example, there, someone's welted that to get the case open. Not a pretty sight. You can't do anything about that. All you can do is use a very, very flat scraper and just take any highlights off. Don't try and be clever. It's an old case, let's not break it. Right, okay, so plastic drain pipes inside, fitted, ready for... There we go, I'll show you all that in a minute. Right, okay, here we go. Right, so here we are now. So that's the jointing compound gone on. Okay. And jointing compounds on the washers of the bolts. That way it squishes up nicely. Makes it all oil tight. Okay. And don't forget, this is your leading bolt. This is the one that's going to go down into here. And that's the one you want to watch. Okay. Right, well, I just drop this down gently on the winch now and do this. We'll see the result in a minute or two. Right, well, that drops together nicely. Right, now, as soon as you've got it together, just put, say, one nut there, one nut there. Maybe something up the top there, just to hold the case together. We're not trying to close it up completely yet, because, like I said, you must line this up. And you've got to pass the bolt through from the other side, get that all lined up, and make sure that's started. I think that's quite important on these. Right, okay, so I'm going to put a couple of nuts on there, then I'm going to spin the engine over, and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so that's this famous bolt that's been put in. This is what caused all the problem in the first place. Because it holds the drainer, right, in place. It's not like the earlier engines where they had like 6 studs around and so on. This is all carried by this little cross bolt. And of course the casing broke and all the rest of it and so on. So it's got to be put in right, and then now we can start putting all the nuts and crankcase bolts together. Not tightening anything up yet. We're not nipping up the case yet. And we'll also see about putting in oil seal and the such like. Anyway, so I'm going to have a cup of tea actually. Right. Right, well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. The block is now stitched together, and everything spins freely. And there we are. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to talk tonight about the end float on the crankshaft.
The end float on the crankshaft is regulated, or adjusted if you like, by 3 shims. Normally 3 shims, nearly always 3 shims, which are very thin pieces of metal. And these are all different thicknesses. Right? Not a lot of difference, but they are different. And what we're going to do is we're going to put these shims into place, nice and clean, no lumps and bumps. And then we're going to put the flywheel on just temporarily. No flywheel oil seal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to measure the amount of backwards and forwards clunk. If there's too much clunk, then we have to take the flywheel off and change up to one thicker thing, and just do it progressively. And I'll show you how we measure it. We just do it very simply with the finger, and there we go. Okay, so I'll get that set up for you, and then we'll see how we get on. Okay. Okay, so now we've put the flywheel on, just nipped it up, no more, just so nothing will move. We're not trying to tighten the thing up. This is my standard workshop flywheel, which I use on various different engines. Now then, we've now got the flywheel, we've got the shims, and no flywheel oil seal, no crankcase oil seal in place. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure the end float, which you can hear as a clunk if you try to move the flywheel backwards and forwards. I'll see if I can do it for you. Sounds quite impressive, but it's a very small amount of movement, and it's this amount of movement we've got to measure. Mustn't be too tight, definitely not, and really shouldn't be too loose. It doesn't do it any good. Okay, so now we're going to bolt the finger on, and I'm going to show you how to take the measurement. Okay, so now we've set up the end float adjusting tool, which, as you can see, all it consists of is an M8, not an M10, an M8 bolt that's just long enough. I use an M8 because then the nut clears the flange. It was just long enough to set up to a point on a known thing. I use a electric grinder key because they've got little studs on them and they're rather good. And then basically, it's as simple as this. We just close the thing up, so that's the end plate to a minimum, and we have a look at this, and if I remember rightly, it comes out at get here, so it just passes nicely. And why I use this little grinding tool is if you're forcing it, you'll see, if you force in there, you'll see this move back a bit and so on. So anyway, there we are. So I'm quite happy I can just pass 0.5 millimeters. So now I got to 0.6 millimeters. 0.6 millimeters. Sorry, it's a bit difficult with one hand. Right, 0.6 millimeters. And we'll pull the flywheel back. If you could hear the clunk, but it has clunked. And then, if I can pass 6, or 60, just perfect. Look at that, that's lovely. Right, that just passes. So that means the difference between the 0.5 and the 0.6 gives you 0.1. And if I remember rightly, it's between 0.07 and 0.15. So if we're falling at 10, we're pretty good. Do the thing again, take this out and do it round, you know, either here or on the opposite side. Do the measurement twice. Once you're happy with it, if it's wrong, if it's too small, you're going to have to increase it by putting in a thicker washer. If it's too large, you've got to reduce it. Okay? If you're reusing your same original crankcase and the original crankshaft, then it shouldn't really change. Make sure that the shims are in good condition when you put them in. But if you've got a different crank, like in this one, you must always check it out. Okay. I think that's about it. So now we take all this off, undo the thing, and then we can then put in the crank crankcase oil seal, which I've shown on several videos, but I suppose we'll be doing that again. Okay, well that's it for me for tonight. I'm going to go and have my supper now. Bye for now.